Okay, here's our last bit on time value of money. And this time I'm going to talk about constant growth perpetuities. And you're going to say, hey, what? What's a perpetuity? Well, glad you asked. A perpetuity is basically an annuity, as the name suggests. It suggests it's perpetual, it lasts forever. So an annuity that lasts forever basically has no future value. The balance behind the annuity, because the annuity is generated from some underlying balance, it never gets bigger and never gets smaller. It just keeps generating income. So if you've got a perpetuity, how much money do you have to set aside? The answer is actually pretty simple. If you know that you can get an interest rate of 10% and you want $10 every year forever, how much do you have to set aside in the bank account? $100, right? You put $100 aside, gives you $10 this year, you take it out, so the $100 is still sitting there, you get $10 the year after, and the year after that, and the year after that. If you take it out, it just generates the same amount each year. So perpetuity is an annuity, but the formula is really simple, right? And here we've got it. If I've got a present value, in other words, that's the amount invested of $100, and I want it to generate $10, then I'd better be getting an interest rate of 10%, right? 10% of $100 gives me $10. Alternatively, I can ask the question a different way. I could say, look, I want this perpetuity to be $10. I know that the investment I can make, whether that's in some mutual fund or in a bank account, I know that can make me 10%. Remember, 10% is just a fancy way of writing 0.1. Right? So, how much do I need to put aside? If I want a $10 perpetuity, $10 divided by 0.1 gives me $100. $100, if it generates 10% every year, will give me $10 every year. So determining the present value of perpetuity is actually pretty simple. To be absolutely honest, though, you're probably not interested in a perpetuity. You very rarely would be interested in a perpetuity. There are two places we can use perpetuities. One is, hey, I genuinely want a long-term income stream. But the other is in valuing a business. And we'll get to that in a later topic. But let's just think about how you would think about one of these income streams. I think I gave you an example earlier of me wanting $100,000 a year out of my superannuation. Well, to be honest, that's not a very smart thing to ask for, right? Because when I'm 67, $100,000 might be a good amount of money. But when I'm in my 90s, with inflation and so forth, $100,000 might not be worth the same amount. It won't buy as many things. So what I should actually be doing is saying, look, I don't want the same amount of money every year. I want the amount of money to grow. And for my superannuation, for my retirement, I want it to grow at least by inflation. So practically, what does that mean? Practically, it means that if I put aside some money and it gives me $10 a year, I can't take that $10 out. I've got to put some of that $10 back in so that it grows. So this year, let's say I put $2 back in. So this year, yes, I've got $10 of income, but I only take $8. I put $2 back in. So next year, I earn 10%, not on 100, but on 102. Okay, and then I take $10, 20. Oh, hang on, but I put some back in. I put a fifth of that back in. Okay, so basically, if you want the payments to grow, it's pretty obvious you can't take as much out. So look, there's an example here that basically works with what we've just talked about. But now let's have a look at a constant growth perpetuity, which is now what I've said. Basically said, if I'm getting a payment and that's generated by a certain interest rate, I can't take all of that payment. Some of that payment has to go back in to increase the amount of funds that are invested. Okay, so I don't have an example. Oh, maybe there are some examples there. But let's actually work it out. Back to my favorite, Excel. Okay. So let's say that I've got $100 And look, I think I can invest that for 10%. So that's the interest rate. So that's my present value. But I want the cash flows that I get to grow by, what's inflation? Maybe 2%. So I want them to grow by 2% every year. How much money do I have to stick aside? Go back to the formula. Take the payment, divide by I minus G. Okay, so interest is 10%, which is a fancy way of writing 0.1. G, growth, is 2%, which is a fancy way of writing 0.02. So remember the formula for perpetuity. The present value is the payment times I minus G. Let me just check that. There it is, yes. Oh, I forgot the subscript. That's going to be the first payment, because remember, the payments are going to grow. Okay, so this will tell us what the first payment is. So if I've got $100, that can give me a payment of P in period 1, whatever that is, times 1 minus G, 0.1 minus 0.02, 0.08. That's not a times, sorry. It should be a divided by. No wonder I get these things wrong. Okay, so my first payment can be 0.08 times 100. It's going to be $8. Let's see if this works. Let's do another amortization table. Okay, so let's go year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that'll do for now. Opening balance. We've put aside $100. The interest that I've earned is 10%. Okay, so 10% of the opening balance. Now, I'm going to put aside a column here saying set aside. So this is the amount I don't take out. Well, I don't take out 2% because I want that to grow. So the amount I take out, payment, is going to be the interest minus the amount I set aside. This is just an information column, if you like. Okay. So a closing balance at the end of year 1 is going to be the 100 I started with, $10 of interest I've made, minus the payment, that's 102. Hey, that's cool. Look, it's grown by 2%. And that's what I've wanted to happen. Right? I wanted to grow by 2%. So let's move to the second year. The opening balance is the closing balance from the first period. The interest, again, 10%, 102. And by the way, I'll do these to cents. How much do I set aside? 2%. So what's that? It's 2% of 102. So the payment is the difference between the interest earned and the amount I have to set aside. So I can take $8.16 out. And the closing balance is what I didn't take out. Okay, let's follow this through for a few years. And let's see that we've got what we actually want. Is the payment actually growing? Okay, let's have a look at the change in payment. The payment has grown from period 1. It's $8.16. It was previously $8. Okay, so that's the ratio. Hey, it's grown by 2%. All right, take off 1. That's the percentage change. It's grown by 2%. What about, yes, the difference between those is 2%. In fact, you'll see the difference between all of them is 2%. The annuity is growing. Actually, if you look at it, the only way the annuity can grow is if the amount invested also grows. Okay, so that's also growing. Okay, so that's a constant growth perpetuity. We can work out what the first payment is, or if we know what the first payment is, we can work out how much we must set aside. So, for me, if I want to put aside 100,000, sorry, if I want the first payment age 67 to be 100,000, if I think that I'm going to be earning, I don't know, 8%, all right, 8% on my investment, but I want it to grow by inflation, which I think is going to be 2%. But how much money do I have to set aside to start off with? It's a bit hard to read. Let's put some commas in there. 1.666 million. If I want to start with 100,000, I want it to grow. Okay, so those are the sort of questions we can answer with constant growth perpetuities. Where else is this sort of thing used? It's also used in valuing firms. If you look at a business, if you look at a firm that's growing and paying out cash flows as dividends, and those dividends are growing, if you make some pretty basic assumptions about how the firm is going to grow, you can use the present value of a constant growth perpetuity to value that firm. Okay? Bear in mind, that's a pretty big assumption to assume that it's going to grow forever. So what a lot of people do when they value businesses is they say, look, we think there's going to be some growth for 5 to 10 years, and then after that, it's just going to go flat. But realistically, if you look at what happens to firms, a reasonable percentage of firms end up failing. So constant growth is not always the best assumption. But hey, look, it's a starting point. It's a way of trying to work out how much we should pay for a firm. But we're going to see that in a later topic. All right, well, that's it for time value of money, and that's it for me.